DJ LeRoy.
NightWatchman. How you doing, buddy?
I'm well. How are you?
Good, good. I'm looking for a real interesting and robust show, especially being that stuff, as they say, still popping out there. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Listen, I know that you watch the 11 o'clock news, and then it keeps you up till 2 or 3 in the morning thinking about what's going on in this country.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So with that note, let's bring out a couple of experts that we can, like, as they say, chop it up. What do you think?
That's a good idea.
I want to bring actually someone new to Soul Lounge Primetime, and that is Dr. Ester Fuchs. She's professor of international public affairs, political science at Columbia University, and she's director of the urban social policy program there. Dr. Fuchs.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here.
Thank you. And she is a Night Watchman, a woman of her word.
Oh, okay.
That's right. Said she was coming on Soul Out, and here she is. Next up is actually the director of the Urban Administration and Justice Policy program there at Medgar College, and that is Professor Wallace Ford. Bring him out.
Okay. Welcome back.
Yeah. Thank you for the promotion. I did not get the memo with respect to that, but I am a professor in the Department of Public Administration, and thank you so much for that at Medgar College in the City University of New York. Yes.
Well, actually, you know what?
The rest of that you just made up, so that's okay.
I did. But you know that's in the ether of what we're going to be discussing later. So yes, remember that.
Yeah.
And
I won't embarrass you.
Thank you.
Too much.
Dr. Basil Smikle Jr. is a distinguished lecturer of politics and public policy at the City University of New York's School of Labor and Urban Studies. Bring him out. Hey,
how are you?
All right.
Welcome back.
Also, being that we are still, I believe, of course, in January, I'm going to give you a belated happy birthday, buddy.
Oh no, thank you very much. And I should update you on my my pilot. No, I was at School of Labor and Urban Studies. I'm director of the public policy program at the Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute at Hunter College at the University of New York, in the former home of Eleanor, Franklin, and Sarah Roosevelt.
Okay. Very good. Okay. Duly noted. So, Night Watchman, are you making your edits?
No, I'm not.
I'll send a memo. We'll send a collective memo.
It's breaking news. I'll put the little banner underneath, and we'll put the edits there.
Well, this next one is actually kind of easy. The reason it's kind of easy because both Esther and I have a connection, and that is none other than he's from the office of the deputy mayor, and that's Mayor Joshi, and that's Mr. James Archer. Bring him out.
Welcome back, James.
Thank you. Love to be here with all these illustrious guests.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So, Night Watchman, you want to get it popping, or should I? You always defer stuff to me. You know this, right?
I do, yes, and I am deferring to you again today.
Well, I said that this would be a discussion about American democracy. And so I'm just throwing out the question, is it in peril? Professor Fuchs, start out.
So, yes, in a word, it is in peril. And that doesn't mean I'm not optimistic about the future, but we rest on the past definitely at our peril. This doesn't really even begin with Donald Trump. It goes back further. I would start with Ronald Reagan and essentially the destruction of the Republican Party and the creation of a coalition within the Republican Party that really brought to the fore racism among white Americans and the kind of grievance that tells people that it's okay to take out your guns and overthrow the government when you're not happy. And and then that's on one side of it. And on the other side of it is a concerted effort to take over state governments in order to suppress voters and to gerrymander congressional districts so that we end up often in national politics with minority rule because of the nature of our political system, the Electoral College and the Senate, which give it equal representation to the small states that have more goats and cows than people. And it's they get the same number of senators as we have in New York and California, when they have like 240,000 people in places like Montana. So we're in a very precarious situation right now because we've got a national government, with a Republican Party in power in the House that's willing to just create havoc, and they're not concerned about America's standing in the world, about the debt ceiling, about ensuring that we're live in peace and prosperity, but rather in just ensuring that their point of view, which is less government and their social issue agenda, which we can talk about later, will dominate. And this is very dangerous. We have low voting turnout as a consequence of people being alienated, and we need to bring people back into the political process.
Beautiful. Professor Smikle, same question.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that Esther has said. I'll just add a couple of quick pieces. Most reports suggest that 75% of the world's population lives in countries where democracy is being threatened. If you think about what is happening in Brazil right now, a country I've visited many times, and you see the storming of their government offices a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
That didn't just happen from within. They've learned some of that behavior from what they've seen here in the United States, and we know that many Republican operatives that were associated with Donald Trump had gone to work with Bolsonaro and his team. So there is this sort of cross-fertilization, if you will, of bad behavior and ill intent. I would also add the concerns around the future that I have. If you consider these conversations and these actions in Florida, for example, around AP African American Studies, it's not just about the texts and the curriculum. This is a concerted effort, in my view, from cradle to career, to make sure that public institutions are not empowering people of color, are not are disenfranchising them in multiple venues, meaning taking away the vote, but also taking away opportunities for those communities to learn about their own identity and their historic narratives. That all has an impact on creating a culture of civic engagement and advocacy, which, for those that have looked at this, know that communities of color, particularly African American communities, have had for decades, for 100 plus years in this country. And so when I think about the erosion of democracy, I don't just look at whether or not the current the institutions as they currently exist are operating properly and are and have the ability to adapt and be responsive, but I also look at the future, and my concern is about whether or not the opportunities to be more civically engaged, more civically active, to be better stewards of our democracy, I believe that is eroding also. That gives me concern.
Wow. Okay. Professor Ford. Oh, you're mute. Mute.
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I would just begin by saying that the historical reality is that, as Dr. Fuchs just mentioned a couple of moments ago, Esther mentioned, which is that this country's government was not designed for majority rule. Just from literally from the very beginning. You think about who the people were in 1787 in Philadelphia, putting together the Constitution. They did not trust, the popular. Most people couldn't read or write. They weren't literate. We had to, imagine if you just had the top 2% of America being represented at some governmental entity. That's what we had in 1787, and so there was always the concern that something called just true democracy would be bad for the country, which is why, again, as Esther pointed out, you have the Senate set up so that Montana has as much power in the Senate as California. Even though we're talking about just many times over the level of population, we are one of the few countries that presumes to be a democracy, which doesn't elect a head of state by a true popular vote. And so we wind up with these situations. Been there for a while. Actually, it's always been there that we haven't had that in place. It's been exacerbated, certainly over the last 50 years or so. And I would just take issue. You say, well, the Democrats and Republicans, kind of, both of them upheld segregation. Both of them upheld lynching. Both parties have never been very strong on so-called civil rights until relatively recently. But in '64, Barry Goldwater was the nominee for the Republican Party, and he had voted proudly against the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And I think you might want to point out, there's an inflection point at some point where the Republican Party is starting to move in another direction. Of course, when after the passage of the Civil Rights Bill and the Voting Rights Act, you had this mass movement of formerly some of the Democrats to the Republican Party because they felt there was a home there because they didn't support civil rights, obviously, or rights for Black Americans. We fast forward, and I'll be brief at this point, to where we are right now. And because of things like the Citizens United decision in 2010, I believe, which just basically said the free flow of money can go into politics at this point. And the billionaire class of this country is notoriously right-wing conservative, and they've been putting just literally hundreds of millions and billions of dollars into the governmental system so that you have true minority rule at this point. We have, the current Republican majority in the House. They say America sent us here. Well, no, America didn't send you there. But they peddled that myth, and the people who are paying for this really could care less about most of the so-called agenda of the Republican Party. What they care about is the ability to hold on to as much money as they can, to have as few regulations as possible, and in the process, continue the racial inequities that they believe is just the law of nature. So last part, we're in pretty bad shape, and I think the notion that, well, maybe it's not so bad after all is a true mistake. History will tell us that you ask people who were around in Germany in 1920, 1930, they said, well, yeah, it's Nazi Party, National Socialist Party, they're a little off, and this Hitler guy, but this is Germany. We're a traditional and stable nation, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into something else. And if people might think that's extreme, I don't believe so.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. James, you're one of the youngest members here. You've seen actually the nation's first Black president. We're supposed to be in this post-racial democracy. Let me have some of your thoughts.
So I want to take a little bit of something from each of the speakers before me. What Professor Fuchs said about kind of a party that is content with causing havoc. They have just abdicated all responsibility for governing. And then what Professor Smikle said about kind of the erosion of the ability to become civically involved, and that this is another party that I think needs to take responsibility here, which is the media, and just the absolute inability to report objective news. And I don't want to go into what objective means here, but I can understand that for any person who wants to become engaged, watching mainstream media or watching kind of like the big news networks makes it almost impossible. I mean, because like the agenda of every network is just so transparent that, you know, if someone is not civically engaged, they're not coming in with a predisposition, then they're not going to want to, and they're just content with staying uninvolved. And that's how you let, you know, a Republican Party lead this kind of minority rule insurrection, because, you know, there's a lot of people in the country who are just not engaged and not willing to pay attention. And then lastly, I want to also put a little bit of the blame on the Democratic Party, who, with this kind of insistence on remaining quote unquote civil, of taking the higher road, while, you know, the Republican Party is willing to do whatever. I mean, they'll lie, they will just be outwardly racist, they will do anything, and we still need to kind of maintain this demeanor of civility. I just think it's a failure. You know, we need to absolutely stoop to some of the same tactics they do, because clearly it's effective. Clearly seizing the state houses and disenfranchising and gerrymandering is effective for them. They are been, you know, despite losing 7 of the last 8, you know, national votes, the popular votes, they've still managed to maintain a significant amount of power. So we need to kind of dramatically alter our tactics in the Democratic Party.
So, Professor Fuchs, as you know, one of my favorite courses of all time at Columbia was American Parties and Elections. Okay, so big ups on that. But having heard what James just said, now of course no one saw an insurrection like that on January 6th coming. So, Lord knows we are definitely in a different phase of our democracy. Now, we've had fluxes before. Democracy is always in flux,
Right.
but this time is definitely different. So please, someone tell me what is different about this moment.
So, you know, I'll jump in here. I just want to differ with James on one thing. I believe the Democratic Party does have to change tactics, but it doesn't have to engage in the kind of lying and destruction that the Republican Party has engaged in. The Democratic Party has to figure out how to get out its vote. They, you know, that would go a long way in changing the dynamics in Washington and changing the dynamics in the state houses. The two things that have happened, where, you know, the Democratic Party has been in some sense asleep at the wheel and in some sense conscious about choices that it made. When you go back to Bill Clinton's presidency, all of us remember the free trade agreement. With that free trade agreement, there was supposed to be job training. We were supposed to, I mean, it was, when you think about it, it's kind of extraordinary. Bill Clinton did 2 very destructive things. He turned AFDC, Aid to Family with Dependent Children, into TANF, and he made wealth. So, you know, cash assistance was an entitlement. He turned it into a block grant, which has really hurt people, because and they made a work requirement, which I don't object to, except they didn't put in sufficient daycare to help women if they were going to work. And of course, when they did the free trade agreement, the idea was, we were going to keep the clean energy, you know, clean jobs, and we were going to ship overseas all these dirty jobs, right? Well, first of all, the globe is the globe, and if you have to deal with global warming, turning over dirty jobs to China and India is not a solution. But having said that, there was never any job training. So, you know, we know closing the coal mines and the deindustrialization in this country affected the Black and the white working class in this country, particularly. And in certain parts of the country, there's been no recovery. In places in the Midwest and in places in the Southwest, there was never a recovery from the loss of those industrial jobs. So Democrats created a situation ripe for culture wars and ripe for Republicans to sort of swoop in and say, I mean, when you fast forward to Donald Trump's victory, and he won, I believe, in two ways. He won by promising white working class people that he was going to bring back industrial jobs. Of course, he lied. What he did was lower income tax for rich people, but his promises, and of course, what he did, and this is where, Wallace, I think a really important distinction of the earlier years is that Trump, what we used to call a dog whistle around the race, that the Republicans, had a kind of subtle racist message. Well, it's not subtle anymore, right?
No.
It is out there, full blown foghorn style. And they basically combined these culture war issues with this I'm going to bring back industrial jobs, and then a concerted effort by the wealthy Republicans to create the think tanks and the political apparatus to take over state houses and to kind of stop in its track our expansion of the electorate. So Curtis, the stuff we talked about years ago in American partisan elections, I think about it. I remember starting that class saying, American democracy is, the expansion of the vote. Well, right now, it's the detraction of the vote. It's trying to keep people from voting. It's a travesty. And to me, these are the places where the Democratic Party has fallen short on job training and preparing people for the new economy, and on ensuring that we have fair representation at the state houses and ensure that people can vote. So, they're there now. They're thinking, there's an improvement, I think, but it's late to the party, very late.
Well, just real quick, which is, and history is really important here. The Constitution and the United States government that we see here today was designed for the primary power to be with the states. Okay, it's not a secret. It's this is the only country that has 50 different boards of education, and therefore 50 different sets of curriculum, depending upon where you live. And the list kind of goes on with respect to the differences between the states. But the power is within the states, and it's no secret. But a lot of us have been focused on the bright, shiny object of who's president, as opposed to looking at who is in the state house, who's running the legislature, who's running the city councils, who's running the school boards. And this is where, the other side has focused. And as we speak right now, I think it's 31 states have the state houses controlled by Republicans. And I think if they can get 3 more, they're now and took control of the presidency and the Senate, they're on their way to being able to change the Constitution. I mean, that's their long game. And when they get to do that, don't think that the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are sacrosanct. And and if that sounds extreme, it's because it is. But I don't think it's far fetched at all. They have a long game strategy, and minority rule is something that's always existed in this country, but it's been exacerbated. I spent a bit of time in South Africa after the transition, and to ask people how did minority rule really work, was take control of the governmental apparatus and the economic apparatus, and you can be outnumbered 10, 20 to 1, and you'll still have the power. And that's what we're looking at.
Gotcha. And Professor Smikle, now you as a party leader for the state of New York, tell me your thoughts, especially what Professor Fuchs said in terms of these dog whistles, which are no more. These are real loud proclamations that, hey, majority rule is going to be the thing. What did you see in this past midterm election?
Well, let me go back a little bit since we're talking a bit about party and so on. And I just need to make the point that the party labels change, but the people stay the same. Right? The people and the themes and the concepts, the hate, the prejudice, the discrimination, those people stay the same. If you go back to FDR, we laud the New Deal for the sweeping public policy changes that it provided for this country coming out of the Depression. But FDR, like many of the day, were influenced by Southern segregationists who were intent in saying, we'll accept your policy proposals, Social Security, all those other things, as long as you make sure that Black people don't benefit. So when you look at the GI Bill, when you look at the Wagner Act, when you look at all of these public policy programs that helped a certain class of Americans get their homes, get an education, get financial assistance, Black folks were intentionally excluded from that, and that sort of helped create the kind of wealth disparities that we see to this day. Those were Democrats. It's over the course of decades, and Nixon sort of carried it to one point in post Brown versus Board of Ed and white flight. And it is Reagan with where I pick up with what Esther has said earlier, that it was Reagan that solidly put those Democrats into the sort of Republican Party. And my point in saying that is that over the course of time, the people who have been the people who with intentionality have tried to disenfranchise people of color and African Americans in particular are still those people. Whether they're Democrats or Republicans, they are still those people, and they are still hard at work. And why and where it intersects with what Wallace is saying, it's not just that we have 50 different school boards. There are actually 14,000 school districts in this country.
Wow.
There are 18,000 law enforcement agencies in this country. So the fragmentation that is an important feature of American government gives a lot of people opportunity to be active and engaged at this sort of hyper local level. And what the Republicans have done over the course of decades is realize that they have traction, they can have traction at this hyper local level. So that's why you're seeing school boards meetings become very hostile in a lot of these southern states, right? Look around critical race theory. Nobody talks about critical race theory in fifth grade. It's history, right? But the point is that they know that when you deal with parents and their kids and schools, there's a sense of urgency and a vulnerability there that if they use critical race theory as the wedge, it opens the door for other opportunities to organize. So my point is that what Republicans did, and were very smart about it, and as others have said, the Democrats sort of fell asleep on this, is that hyper local organizing. Why is it that over the last few years, the United States, most of the folks in the United States have had this incredible civics lesson? Most people know what a Secretary of State does. Most people do not know that, 4 years ago. We're focused on other elections, like elections for sheriff and so on and so forth, because we realize that hyper-local game has been played by Republicans for a long time. They've gotten good at it. And I would also add two things very quickly. Under Obama, Democrats lost almost 1,000 seats nationally in state houses. And
wow.
what that did, and the challenge for that is, and this is what I always say, where Bernie Sanders sort of ran against the Democratic Party, Barack ran around the Democratic Party. And I'm not saying that was wrong. They wanted to get elected, fine. But what that did was it kept the parties from being able to have a well-financed infrastructure. Why is that important? Because everybody knows when it's time to vote for your president, but does everybody know when they should go vote for city council? So it's those local elections where you have those really low turnouts, but those are the people that get elected that have an impact on your day-to-day lives. And the infrastructure that the parties provide is what helps elect those people. And when that got starved for a very long time, when it falls short, or when it collapses, it really does impact how the parties respond in those local elections. And then the last quick point on the media side, since I do a lot of media, the media has, yes, I agree that in many ways the media has contributed to us operating in silos. The problem is that we still really don't have a good way of stopping that. When I went to, it's a quick story, I went up to Ithaca to speak at Cornell a couple of years ago, And what do you do when you have 4 hours to kill in Ithaca, New York? You get a tattoo. So I went to a tattoo artist, and I asked him, without telling him what I do, I asked him, how do you get your news? And he said, YouTube. Now, the point is that if you look at most, and I would imagine for Wallace and Esther, most of your students and my students, they're cord cutters. They don't watch TV news. They don't watch. I'm on MSNBC 3 times a week. They don't watch me because they don't watch news like that. They're scrolling most of the time. They're on YouTube or they're on Twitter or other platforms where they can just get these quick bites. The problem is they don't watch a BBC or an NPR or Al Jazeera, which I love, and those long form news formats. And so it becomes harder and harder to get more balanced information when you're on a platform that just sends you down a rabbit hole through the algorithm. It's actually much more, the burden on the individual is much greater now than it's ever been to actually go out and seek other opinions. And that's on both sides of the aisle. That's not just Democrats or just Republicans. So,
gotcha. Well, James, where are you getting your news sources from?
I would say I definitely peruse some of the websites like the Times, MSNBC. Shout out Al Jazeera, Professor Smikle. But actually, I would say the bulk of my news comes from Twitter, following journalists and news sites on Twitter, because it's just an amalgamation of everything, and it really makes it easy to kind of get it at once. And that's why the purchase of Twitter by Elon Musk really got me in some distress, because it really is just core to my daily routine and getting that news immediately, and then not only getting the news but getting the underlying commentary, because there's definitely some things I don't think of when I read an article, so it kind of helps me to get a contrasting opinion of things that I'm reading. So Twitter has been really, really core.
Gotcha.
So, following up on what you said about Elon Musk, we've always had the problem about media ownership and how that slants the narrative. But it's even more complicated now with the algorithm-driven effects of social media and the decisions that those owners make. Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk have a tremendous sway in the conversation, the national conversation, but so does Jeff Bezos as owner of the Washington Post and Newsweek. And Rupert Murdoch has still always had a profound influence on the direction of that narrative too, is on the right side, as well as some of these guys like the owners of Newsmax and some of these other fringy but still far-reaching right-wing outlets. So how do we address this in 2023?
Anyone?
Well, I think that just very, very briefly, I think that the fact that Brother James Archer is talking about the fact that there's a huge and growing number of people who don't even get their news information through so-called traditional sources, that probably those people who are in political party apparatus situations may consider putting more effort into getting messages out that way. I think that's a start. I do think that the whole notion of what is fact anymore. There's facts, true facts, facts, lies. It's just become as the Temptations once said, a ball of confusion. And when people are confused, many times they just tune out. And so I just don't know what everybody's talking about. I'm out of here. And so it goes back to again what Basil was talking about, and which is the local level. Because you at least know your neighbors or the people in your community and neighborhood, and getting engaged politically there. When I'm teaching an introductory class for public administration, I have students, who's your city council member? I have no idea. Okay. Do you know what your city council? Well, somebody's like, who's your mayor? Well, they know who the mayor is. The governor, depends. And it's like you realize these people have control, have a lot to say what happens in your lives, right? And said, well, I didn't realize that either. And so I believe that, and just as a final comment, education is really important. When, as I said, when I was growing up, I know when Esther was growing up, and Basil, James, I'm not quite so sure about you, but I know, Curtis, for you, basic civics.
I think we might have lost him
But
for a second.
who's you know
Okay.
who's in the what is a cabinet? What's the president and Congress and all of that? Not in the rush to popularize STEM, which I'm not against, but it's important whether you're a scientist or not. You really need to know how the damn government works, and we need to have more emphasis on that. It's really starting from K to BA. That we need to have more emphasis on just whatever your major is. You need to understand how government works. It's that important. So, as you know, James, Curtis, I had told you before that they're sending a helicopter to the top of my building in a couple of minutes to take me to an undisclosed location. So I want to thank. Good to see all of you, and hopefully I will be released before the next time I get to appear on the street.
Well, make sure you take the classified documents with you.
Right. Absolutely. I keep them right here all the time. Thank you very much. You take care.
Thank you, Professor Ford. Take care, buddy.
Take it out. Bye-bye. Good to see everybody. Take it out.
Okay.
Can I jump in here on James's point? Because
Yes, you can.
I think this is so important. When he answered your question, Curtis, about where he gets his news from, because I just heard a talk by a woman named Barbara Walters, Barbara F. Walters, who's a professor out in California. Wrote a best-selling book on when civil wars happen and will we have a civil war in the United States. And she is doing a new study looking at the radicalization on social media for among mostly this is focusing more on the Middle East and the jihadists, but the issues that she brought up were so telling and important about how AI is being used to curate essentially what we read. And one of the points that came up was, local media, at least we've got, we need to be focusing on creating new channels of local media. Well, when you look at the data on that, I don't know if everybody is familiar with this, but there is a company called Sinclair, owned by a guy named David Suit, who is a right-wing, supports right-wing political causes and is a right-wing ideologue. And he is buying up local news stations all over the country and feeding them content. And of course, the people who primarily watch local news are old people or older people. That's a nicer way to put it, since I'm sure I'm one of them. And of course, so young people are getting their information here on social media. Older people are getting information from local news, which is now being dominated by right-wing ideologies. And we have AI, curating people's feeds. That was pointed out to me that even if you read the New York Times, if you read it online, the Times is curating it. And you're not even getting what you would get as if you read a paper newspaper and flip through it yourself. You're missing a lot of the stories that you might have seen. And so on the media side, we're in big trouble right now. We're really in big trouble because, this is apart from the structural factors that we talked about earlier in the political process, which weigh against engaging more and more people. And I do think that the most important thing we have to do now is really about civic engagement. And while I wish it was just the old civics courses, it's really not, because we have such a, what did we have in the last mayoral race? 23% turnout.
Wow.
In an election. So we have to, and what we know is that people are not engaging because they don't really believe their vote makes a difference. it's too complicated for them. In the last round in New York, right, we had 5 local elections. People are not turning out 5 times. And, they're doing other activities and that are, not connected to politics in any way. And they're disgusted and disaffected. And the most important thing I think we have going for us is local politics and the ability to get people connected to the electoral process by connecting them to other forms of political engagement where they feel that their activity can make a difference or that somebody is listening to them. And, I work on a number of projects involved in that right now. I have Who's on the Ballot, which is designed to make it easier for people to get information. And I'm doing a thing called Community Speak, which we're working with local organizations. And we are doing surveys twice a year that are around needs, not like what do I want from government. Basil will tell you those kinds of things are really political. They're for elected officials to try and get a sense of what the weather is out there. But really, to use data for policy, we need to know what people need, how are they suffering, and so that we can target resources to high needs communities. And we learned in COVID, what we knew already, but what became so apparent is that that Black and brown communities were disproportionately affected by COVID, not just health effects, but social and economic effects. And it hasn't gone away. And I believe we need to reconnect these people, and we need to get city government to start focusing on those kinds of issues much more directly so that people feel they have a reason to engage. Because if they don't, then we're just going to get the people who have grievance and who are angry. And that is, on both sides of the political spectrum. I was glad you brought up Bernie Sanders because I think he really did such a disservice to the Democratic Party. I mean, it's, as we know, those of us who served in government, and James knows this now, it's so easy to yell from the outside and do nothing. It's just like in the legislature, like people like AOC is like Bernie Sanders. Everything's wrong. Well, you're there to legislate and fix stuff. So do your job. If you want to just yell and scream, be an advocate, right? Do that job.
Yes, yeah.
So we need to have more, more of this kind of activity, I think, to reconnect people.
Two things, Basil, on Esther's comments, but also in terms of what James had brought up earlier in terms of Twitter, getting the information and news from there. Your thoughts on that first?
No, well, I think I mean, look, I'm on Twitter also. I think I'll say this because I tell my students this all the time. You are no longer the average voter. Because you're going to class, you're doing research, you're learning this stuff from experts, and you have opportunities to really think through a lot of these issues. But who's the average voter? The average voter today, right now, is probably driving a bus. They get an hour lunch break, 2 15-minute breaks a day. What are they going? Where are they getting their news? They're probably, in New York. They're probably waking up in the morning, watching New York 1, Channel 5, Channel 11, because they want to get the weather, the subways, the roads, alternate side, and 2 minutes of like what's happening locally, right? Like, and they probably won't read news again until they get home at night.
Right.
And so when you think about how people consume news from that point of view, from the point of view of the average voter, what are they reading? What are they watching? What messages are they getting on a regular basis? Now, those aren't people that necessarily move opinion, but they definitely have opinions. The question is, how are we talking to them? How are we talking to the folks that are getting their news on the Twitter feed and getting commentary? How are we talking to the folks who are scrolling through their feeds and there's some hot take on the history of voting rights in this country, whatever the case is, right? Like, there are so many ways to get information that it's become more and more difficult to make sure that the information that people are getting is good, balanced,
yes,
and accurate. And to an earlier point, all of those descriptors that I just gave you are subject to opinion. There's no standard truth anymore. And that's what's so challenging. But like I said, my students in particular, they're cord cutters, so they are consuming a lot of information. But sometimes, and not sometimes, but oftentimes I have to come in and say, well, but let me give you context. And I actually think that that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is that we lack context and we lack nuance for a lot of what we're hearing and seeing today. So that's something that I talk about a lot. But to Esther's point, and I actually just want to talk about the Bernie Sanders piece of it, because while I was running the party in the state, that was during the Bernie Hillary primary, which was very contentious. A lot of people said that I was rigging the party to support Hillary, when a lot of Bernie supporters who were independents couldn't register and couldn't vote for him in the primary. They thought we changed the laws to make sure that they could not vote, which is not true. Those laws have been on the books for about 50 years, that we have closed primaries. So if you're an independent, you can't vote in the Democratic primary. And I say that to say that there was this movement, if you will, to essentially tear it all down. Now, I'm not saying the parties don't have their problems, and I'm not saying that the way we vote for our leaders shouldn't change, shouldn't be more accessible. I actually believe that they should be. But I also think that we blame the Republicans sometimes, but I do think there were a lot of folks who were bent on saying this system is rigged from top to bottom.
Right.
You shouldn't be engaged. We just burn the whole thing down. And I think what that did, and again, I think part of this was true for Obama, but in a different way, is make it so that anyone that was affiliated with the party was just not legitimate. And it also made folks who, were raised in the party, trying to get to a position of power and influence at some point in their careers, were all of a sudden not legitimate. So somebody like me who, was involved in party activities while I was a SEPA student in the early 90s, all of a sudden now I have power, but all of a sudden nobody cares about people like me anymore. Like I'm all of a sudden old and irrelevant in my mid-40s, because parties now for so many people are a thing of the past and irrelevant. And I say it's a flawed system, but it's what we have, and you've got to be engaged. And I think that was a real that language and that conversation from that time really did a disservice to where and I think helped contribute to where we are today.
Absolutely. And James, are you an average voter, or I know you do label yourself a progressive? Now, you heard some of the comments as relate.
I'm not taking the bait. I'm not taking the bait. But I will say something quickly on AOC, completely unrelated to her politics, is that she has figured out how to engage with her constituency in a way that pretty much no other member of Congress has. I mean, if you follow her on any platform, she's like going on Instagram and having, Q&As multiple times a week. She's talking about her, sometimes makeup tips, or, she, during the pandemic, she had a couple of times where she was streaming her playing video games with like other members of Congress or people from the gaming community as a way to get out the vote. I mean, there's a reason that she has like 13, 14 million followers on Twitter, and Hakeem Jeffries is less than 1 million. I mean, it's just like she's figured out a way to engage in a way that I think should be modeled by others in the Democratic Party. It is just a more modern, engaging way.
James, I just want to make a quick point there. She is engaging with her Twitter followers, and she's brilliant. So I think she's, in that regard, you are right. She is not engaging with her constituency. My doorman Felix is her constituency. They do not like her that much in her congressional district. She's not there on the ground, oddly and strangely and interestingly. she beat Crowley because he didn't live in that district. Nobody knew who he was. She was very smart to, take him on. And she had the infrastructure from the Working Families Party to help her. The turnout in that district is less than 10% for those races.
Wow.
So this is a different, this is different. She's a national political figure, God bless, let her do that work. But that's not, the same thing as engaging with your constituency as a congressperson. So she has a huge, and, maybe she should run for the Senate because frankly, she probably would represent a broader constituency better than she represents, a congressional district, to be honest. And my criticism of her is, she did not do her homework like on the Amazon deal. She put stuff out that was, she said, oh, let's use this money for something else. Well, as you know, tax abatements are not real money. You only get a tax abatement if somebody builds something and the taxes are abated. So there was no real money to use for something else. She completely misrepresented that deal. And I find that kind of fairly typical of her in how she does things. When she cares, she's totally in it and deeply in it. And as I said, she's smart. This is a very smart person, but those are a different set of questions than whether or not you're representing your constituency. And if we want to save local democracy, that isn't going to do it, frankly.
You know what? Until he actually got kicked off the platform, we could say that Trump was one of the early proponents in terms of being a Twitter leader.
Yep.
Well, let's also talk about the fact that he's now been reinstated for Facebook, just in time, for him to really start his presidential run. And as we're now 22 months away from the next presidential election, amazingly, what do we think the effects of that between Twitter now opening back up to more right-wing voices and now Facebook putting Trump back on, how is that going to affect the next election cycle?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit, and then I actually may need to escape from the realm for a bit to take another call. But first of all, he has been reinstated to Twitter as well, and he's been on Twitter for a minute, but he hasn't actually tweeted because he's found an alternative, which was Truth Social. So he's actually been spending more time and doing more, and actually talking a lot crazier on Truth Social than he ever did in the other platforms prior to this.
Wow.
Facebook Meta has said that they would install some guardrails for him. Now that they've sort of gotten their act together and figured out what the actual policy will be. So I think there are two things there. One, that technology always, the laws and the rules and the guidelines governing technology always lags behind the advances in technology. So people have used Twitter and Facebook and the social media platforms in ways that the law could not catch up with in time before the damage was done. And the damage was done. And so remember, he was taken off because of his January 6th engagement and comments. So my point is that, my second point is that, whatever guidelines that Meta says that they will provide to keep him within bounds, it's really just going to be a platform for him to put out commercials. And I think that's why they wanted to reinstate him at this point, so they can make money off of his ads.
Yes, follow the money.
Out of the conversation, and he'll use Truth Social to do his dirty work, if you will, and advance the more sort of heinous messages and comments. But the reality is that he now has every platform that he would need to continue what he does. Yeah.
No worries.
It was good to be on with all of you. Thank you all, as always, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Professor Smikle, for sure.
Esther, good to see you. We got to
Great to see
break
you.
bread
We have to
soon.
catch up. Yes.
All right.
All right.
Take care, everybody.
Take care. So you know what? Before I go to you, James, I just got to see. Bob, did you actually buy those Trump coins yet, or no?
did, did you stay up last night writing that line? Come on now.
So James, you heard about from Professor Smikle before he left in terms of really being able to determine what fact from fiction. Going down Twitter, remember you have a lot of information, a lot of how should I say, a lot of sources coming through there. How do you determine when going down that rabbit hole what the hell is BS and what is real?
Well, a couple things. Two main things is that one, I follow verified sources, people who I follow journalists, right? I follow specific outlets that I've vetted before.
Okay.
I follow people that have at least a base level of repute. And then also, if there's something that is a factual assertion, I always, will then double check it. I will do the research to ensure that this is actually verified by more than one source.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
At this point, like I've had to change the way that I do research because of how information has just been, kind of the whole way that people get information has just been tainted now. I think people realize that you can lie on the internet with
impunity.
I think we lost him for a sec there. Well, Professor Fuchs, I want to know from you. Do tell in terms of. I think you went out for a little bit. You want to re-say your.
I was just saying that people realize that you can lie with impunity, so they do that. So it's changed the way that I do research because now I have to verify everything that I read.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Professor Fuchs, where are you getting your news sources?
So I've always kind of tried to use multiple sources, and now it has to be different for the city level, state level, and national.
Mm-hmm.
So for daily stuff, I read every New York City newspaper that I can, and New York Times, Daily News, New York Post.
The Post.
Yes, I try and do the Post, although I don't do it every day because it's just makes my heart race too much. So I don't do it every day. And I also have a subscription to the Washington Post online. But I get the Times online and in paper because I sort of need to have some control over. I realized I got to flip, also. I got to flip the pages. And then we in New York are so lucky to have a tremendous number of online news outlets. So, we've got Politico New York, we've got City and State, we've got Gotham Gazette, we have the Gothamist, the City Limits. I mean, so, you have to curate it a little bit, but if you're interested in the city and in local and in state stuff, we're very lucky here. I do watch some news at night, particularly if I can't fall asleep, which is a bad thing. So I'll do MSNBC and I'll do CNN a little bit. And, I don't really like either of them that much. I realize that, and I watch New York One. I used to watch it more. I don't watch it as much as I used to because I think the young people in a way are right. Television news takes a certain amount of time and it's slow. And for what you get back for the time you put in is kind of not fair. And I am a radio listener in the morning. I listen to multiple radio stations, while I'm getting ready, especially NYC and BBC if I can. And, so I do not do social media. And that is personal only because I know I should do Twitter. I just don't want to because I also read academic literature, right? So I'm reading recent policy reports and studies that are coming out and journal articles. So the Twitter is a rabbit hole, and my daughter worked for TikTok, so I started, in the beginning, I started looking at TikTok, and I said, no way, I'm going to do this. And Facebook, I thought, I've been teaching for way too long. I don't really need anybody to find me who can't go to the internet and look me up online. So it is. So I really, now I feel like I should do more social media because, James is the future. He's the present and the future. And that is where all young people are getting their information. And for us to be, a relevant part of this conversation, we really need to be on top of social media. So, I do a little bit of it, but I don't have my own account. So
Gotcha. Well, you know what? In our closing remarks, I'll let you start off, James, in terms of hope for the future. In terms of, we started with, is American democracy in peril? Okay, we've had this, and now we've of course morphed into social media and news. So do tell, what is the bright hope? Is there a bright hope?
Yeah, I was about to say I'm not particularly optimistic. I will say I've been pleasantly surprised with this president. The last year was last year-ish has been way more productive than I thought it would be. So the fact that he was able to pass some pretty major legislation or packages, kind of, if I can be surprised, then I can be optimistic moving forward. That maybe I'll be wrong with the current outlook of American society.
Okay, so, and Professor Fuchs, your thoughts?
Well, I am by nature an optimistic person. I think, we kind of missed some really important trends out there now. And however, if you have a historical perspective, you kind of know that everything is cyclical. It's like in New York, with the real estate market. When it's up, people think it's never going to come down. And when it's down, people think, and how many times have they declared New York dead, right? And here we are, right? Back again, and we're not going away. So I really believe, that most humans want to do their life in a productive way. They're not the crazy people that are being represented on TV now in the Republican right. And that part of what we have to do is harness people's goodwill and get them connected back to the political process, encourage them. And I agree with James that Biden has really been, I think to a lot of people a surprise, but Biden and Pelosi, I'll give her credit for a lot of the successes in his administration. We managed, to do some extraordinary things during COVID, both as a national government, but also locally as our society. I mean, in a society, if you remember every crisis we've had in New York, people have come from all over the country to try and help us. When it was 9/11, when it was Hurricane Sandy, in the beginning of COVID, nurses and doctors and regular people came here to help. People who you would, from all over, from places where you would never expect anybody to, to want to assist New York. So their politics is easier when you try and divide people. And we have a lot of pernicious elected officials who do that. But in fact, as a country, we've always risen up, and we've gotten leaders that understand, like our Mayor Dinkins, who I just got to talk about yesterday, who's talked about the gorgeous mosaic in New York. This is about bringing people together in positive coalitions for them to understand what they have in common. Not to give up who they are, just to understand what we have in common and why we have to work together to do it. So I believe we can do that.
Excellent. NightWatchman.
So thanks for all our guests. Thank you, Professor Fuchs. Thank you, Professor Wallace Ford.
Professor
Dr.
Basil
Smikle. And
Yes.
of course, the inimitable James Archer, who we always appreciate his point of view here. You've been listening to Soul Lounge Primetime on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem, live streaming on YouTube and Facebook, and now on all your favorite podcast platforms. Thank you for joining us.
Take care,
And
everyone.
see
It
you
was
next
just
Monday.
great to see you all. So nice to meet you, NightWatchman.
Same here. Same here. I might have to enroll in Columbia and see if I can still take that course.
Take care. Take
Bye,
care.
everyone.
Great to see you, James and Curtis. Bye.
All right.